with Yakuza 0, we saw the series go for more of a global audience with releases in the West and China. While the series has been appearing in English for a good while before then, it's also been full of spotty releases, long delays, and sometimes fairly major cuts. So I thought it would be interesting to go over the series' history of censorship and changes. Now, some stuff might verge on whether it counts as censorship or whether it's merely an attempt to change something to appeal to I guess you'd say, a different demographic. Point is, I'm gonna start with the loosest interpretation and go from there. This also isn't going to be in strict chronological order, but it will be in rough chronological order. So I'll start with 0 as the first case and then move on. And if other versions have other stuff to talk about which happens to occur before 0, well, I'll cover that too. So to start with, we're going to talk about Lao Gyu, one of the main villains from Yakuza 0. Now, Lao Gyu looks completely different in the Japanese and Western versions to how he looks in Chinese. Now, I say this is a vague case because it's not really clear whether this was made more to give a prominent Chinese actor a major role, or if it was simply that the character looked so bizarre and ugly that Sega thought it would be a good idea to maybe change his appearance to something less insulting. This is also interesting because while his appearance was switched back to the Japanese for the English release, they kept the Chinese voice actor before switching it over with a patch. Like I said, this is a vague case and I'm not really sure if this is down to maybe some sort of contract issue or what. But hey, this is as vague as it's getting. After this we'll move on to some more clear-cut cases. So let's move on to Yakuza Kiwami as the next in I guess what I'll call the release timeline. Now, Yakuza Kiwami as a remake of 1 went out of its way to bring it more in line with the later entries, particularly 0, so more celeb cameos for one thing. You'll be surprised how many sub-story characters are based on real people. You also might not be so surprised to know the number of female characters played by porn stars. This has kind of been something the series has been doing for ages, but this is a particularly interesting case since it introduces a lesbian character called Rina. You can kind of chat her up in a hostess bar, there's some side quests related to her, and yeah, the player can sleep with her. Not a particularly big shock if you're familiar with how all the hostess stuff tends to work in Yakuza, ignoring like 0 and Karami 2, which kind of don't have that. Well, in the English this was kind of changed a bit. More to say, it was kind of made a bit vaguer. As a blogger, a long-time fan of the series called Dragon of... sorry for messing up your name. Dragon of Dojima Guild. If you want to check it out, she has a whole thing on it. She's not really someone who's like grifting outrage, so I'm pretty sure you can trust her opinions, and I'm going to. She talks about how the dialogue was changed to make it a little less clear what was going on. It seems to me like a case where... localization staff was kind of worried it might be interpreted as a story of being, I guess, you know, fixed to be straight or something, which doesn't feel like what the side quest is trying to go for, but it seems like due to that they changed the dialogue somewhat to try and, I don't know, imply Kiryu looked at her underwear rather than sleeping with her or whatever. So moving away from porn stars, well not completely, but mostly, they come back. We get to talk briefly about Karami 2. This is a very small one, but maybe you'll spot it. Maybe you'll spot something from this trailer which wasn't in the finished game. It's coming, you'll see it. Keep an eye out. This is one of those areas where people... There we go! Yeah, you might not have seen that sequence when you played the game itself. And that's because it was removed. You can still find it in the game's data. I guess people argue that because it wasn't actually in a finished game at any point, it might not count. In the end, I'd say this is just a case where someone told them, like, dude, that might offend some people, cut it out. So yeah, there we go. That's Karami 2, a pretty minor case where something was shown in a trailer and wasn't in the full game. Likely because it would have offended some people. There we go. So now we're hitting what I'm gonna call the hump, because this is when stuff starts to get a bit more dramatic in terms of what was changed, what was altered, and what went on. So Yakuza 3 and 4, interesting cases. Because back to back, we saw a very quick shift in Sega's attitude when releasing these games for the first time in English. The initial version of Yakuza 3 was cut pretty heavily, heavier than any other entry in the series has been in the West. Now Sega initially botched its response to the inevitable wave of outrage over this by claiming it was due to cultural differences or some such. Of course, then they backed off and said instead that it was due to time, really. And I think both are kinda true when it comes to Yakuza 3, since you see some clear stuff being lightly cut just to avoid the sheer amount of time it would have taken to translate, noticeably the hostesses. But holy shit, you do not know how long those scripts are for them girls. Like, geez, like a third of a game or something. Point is, some of this stuff was likely due to Sega being concerned about its reception, even if a large amount of it was just time saving. So let's look at this outraged forum post I dug up the Array Back Machine from Sega's Yakuza forum. Now, this post actually is pretty solid in terms of what it presents. Now, personally, I find the whole "I demand a full refund and I will never buy for you again" stuff a little cringy. Like, no one ever sticks to that shit. But it's actually a pretty good rundown of various alterations. So let's play a game of, was it cut for cultural / censorship reasons, or was it cut due to Sega just wanting to save on time? So let's start with Shogi. I'm just going to say cultural reasons / censorship. Same for Mahjong, because bluntly, there's no reason not to have them in. A lot of people would be confused as fuck by them, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't be low effort to translate. It's just minigames. But then we get to hostess karate clubs and women as hostess clubs and hostess management, which while you could say cultural, it's safe to say that just time constraints would have done them in. Survival tag game, no idea to be honest here. May have just been laziness, that's my guess. Signpost names, call it localization, I don't know. Make your own hostess, file that under hostess clubs, what I've already said. Music, and a lot more music. They do this all the time and it's basically due to licensing issues. All signs of racism removed. Well, that's not strictly true. They do allow a bit in, but yeah, I'm calling censorship on this. This is an interesting case because this was something which got put back in later versions. Cutscenes, throw that under, could be laziness, could be censorship, depends on the side quest they're cut from. Costumes, DLC bullshit attempting to sell people stuff. They say only in the European version, because the European version we got some annoying DLC stuff over here. Side missions, put it under both depending on the issue. Translation, well, I've already said my bit on that. Extra content DLC, it's more DLC. It was free in Japan. Whether it's free or not in the West depends on your country. Whole bunch of characters. Stick that under side quests and minigames. Locations, stick that under side quests and minigames. Answer X answer. I think they just didn't bother translating it because no one was going to get into it. Massage parlor minigame. Now here we've got a juicy one because this is definitely a case of they got cold feet and just cut it, because that would have been incredibly easy to translate and it's a pretty understandable thing. You know, you're not going to get Westerners confused by it. So there we go. That's pretty much my take on everything, apart from finally the option to give Tatachi the Young magazine in Chapter 10. Okay, I'm calling censorship on this. I think this was one of those, okay, this is inappropriate moments. If you're unaware, Tatachi's like a kid in the main game, and you can give him a magazine aimed at, I guess you'd say, older men, older teenagers and younger men. I guess that's how I'd put it. Look, this is what the cover tends to look like. It's actually a manga magazine, but yeah, that's your answer there. So Sega got cold feet. So before I finally move on to the remaster, I want to briefly talk about the side quests which were cut from this game. Sega seems to have a real terror of acknowledging the Japanese sex industry in this game. While it's unavoidable in the main story, so it is there, the side quests that are cut mostly function around this. You know, if it comes down to something like a paid role play session, or hostesses, or massage parlors, or etc., it seems that Sega are quite happy to cut it. One of the most noticeable and most disappointing changes for me was there's kind of a trilogy throughout the first 3 Yakuza games of this couple. It's a hapless salaryman who's always on the verge of either killing himself or killing his girlfriend, who's a hostess who's just kind of bleeding him dry. This game features a kind of conclusion to that trilogy, and sadly it didn't make its way into the first English release, which really sucks. Was it because it tied back to hostesses, or was it because it contains an incest joke? Who knows? In the end, the side quests which are cut may in some cases just be to the awkwardness of them. For example, one is about Kiryu trying to learn English, which was likely fairly tricky to figure out how they would translate. And let's not forget, they're trying to get this thing done dirty, cheap and quick. So there, now it's on to the remasters. And to start off with, we have something cut not due to an English market, but probably due to the Asian market, which is the inclusion of the Japanese imperial flag for one of the villains as his clan quest. Yeah, you notice this happens a lot in the West too, with, for example, the Rebel flag. GTA's been updating it out of its newer releases of its older games. And this is likely the same case, only for this, it's more probably down to, you know, Asians in Japan, or attempts to release it overseas in Asia. In the end, this is kind of oversensitivity, but what can I say? Fucking villain has the thing. Guy's one of the most unlikable characters in the whole series, but you know what, Sega's gonna play it safe. So let's move on to Yakuza 4, and we start with probably the biggest change made to the game, and it was probably made for the sake of Japanese audiences, and how kind of insanely sensitive they get about the use of coke or any sort of drug. Basically, getting accused of cocaine in Japan seems like it's sort of a career death sentence. Tanimura's voice and likeness on PS3 got accused of that. He wasn't convicted, nevertheless Sega removed his voice and likeness from the PS4 release of Yakuza 4. It's kind of stupid and it kind of sucks for him, and some people have said he was a pain to work with, but whatever, it's Sega being crazy sensitive about this accusation. For the record, Pierre Taki, in Judgment, also had the same shit happen to him, only he was successfully convicted, and that resulted in the game being pulled from stores in Japan, so you see how crazy they get about this stuff. I've got a bunch more stuff to talk about with Yakuza 4 though, and it might not be as dramatic as removing every voice line and changing a character model and completely redoing all their lines for one of the main playable characters, but it's pretty interesting and begins to step into all sorts of places in terms of what was changed for who and who was changed for what, or what have you. So let's move on. See, more in the know viewers may have noticed that I left out a pretty major cut from Yakuza 3 when it came time to release it on PS4. And that's because I wanted to leave it till here, because it's an interesting one. Let's just show it.
Oh god. No, no, no! Ah! giant spook transvestite. Am I gonna get raped?
Your mom, Sailor. Now Big Mama's gonna rock your world.
This can't be happening. What the fuck? Is that like a game over? Do I just need to retry?
Sugar buns, I'm so hot for you right now. Big Mama's gonna loosen up.
Ooh, loosen you up a little? No! And then Kazuma got raped. Ah! Oh shit! I feel so violated. Nobody can know about this. Oh shit! Dear Lord, that was worse than anything in the joint. Oh my God! He got raped. Oh, he got experience now.
That's the best. He gets experience.
I feel a little more experienced after today. Congratulations, you've been selected to test a new company's brand new Super H water.
I left that till now because it relates to some of the changes made in Yakuza 4. You see, I initially assumed that characters' side quests were cut because of like Western sensitivity, but I'm not sure that's the case. I think it might be more on the Japanese side. That's because I've taken a close look at some of Yakuza's lines spoken by the Japanese actors. Not just looking at the subtitles, but looking at what the actual actors are saying. And I've noticed some cuts and changes in the actual Japanese, stuff which would not need to be done if it was just for the sake of English speakers. So let me show you what I mean. Now, have a look at this scene, and I've been pretty careful to cut it so you can kind of tell the change if you pay attention.
そのことを聞いたら、君は以前世話になった店だって。あの店ね、オカマバーだったんだよ。知ってた？店ね、女装バーだったんだよ。知ってた？店のキャストは全員男だったんだよ。だから君が働いていたというのはおかしい。殺された店長は雇われでノーマルの人だったから分かんなかったかもしれないけど、店のキャストは全員オカマさんだったんだよ。ノーマルの人だったから。
Now, you might notice that the subtitles are different, but if you've got a keen ear, you'll notice that the actual dialogue is different. And that's because that scene's been re-recorded for the PS4 in Japanese to remove some of the terms. The most obvious one, if you're an English speaker, will be that Akiyama no longer says normal in Japanese, but it's an English word, you get what I mean. But there's also some other terminology, stuff which might translate to, in English to something close to tranny, which has been removed. That's kind of my point. Like, if it were just for the sake of an English-speaking audience, they probably wouldn't fucking bother with that. Now, this is quite clearly that, yeah, being a bit more sensitive to Japanese sensibilities, I guess. No, it's just something I wanted to point out because I don't think many people have noticed that. Now, I'm not trying to hide my opinion on these things, so let's step into one of the more obnoxious changes I've seen. But before that, I want to briefly address the retranslations for Yakuza 3 to 5 when they made the move to PS4. I'm very mixed on them, and I'll explain why. If you recall the early trailers for Yakuza titles, they tended to focus more on sort of a hardcore, grittier, darker crime drama image, versus now where they tend to go comedic a bit more. I think it's a bit of a simplification to say they were trying to make it look like GTA. I don't think they ever were going for that. And to be honest, the newer trailers also are kind of disingenuous in their own way, but they definitely advertise these games more comedically now, and this has shone through in how some of the titles are translated. So you see this dialogue on screen. Yeah, this is from the PS3 version of Yakuza 5. I believe the translation was actually handled by Sony. And I'm going to show you how it's been changed. This isn't in a point about like censorship or anything, because I'm considering this a separate area. I just want to give you an idea before I talk about what is definitely a case of things being cut for sensitive ears or eyes. Now, it's quite straightforward dialogue, ain't it? Let's show you how it looks in the PS4 version. Yeah, that's a bit of a change, ain't it? Now, I really don't like this aspect. It often makes some dialogue quite cringy. Interesting example is with one of my favourite characters in the series, Shinada. There's a point in the PS3 version where he's like trying to meet like a prostitute / sort of lover of his, and he keeps making weird milk puns in the PS4 version, and it's fucking awful, and that wasn't there in the PS3 one. Now, maybe someone who knows Japanese will tell me that this sort of awkward, overly jokey dialogue full of puns and shit about wanting to shit is an alteration that makes it more accurate to the Japanese original. But I do not buy it. I find that very unlikely. Maybe I'm wrong. To me, this feels like an awkward attempt to try and just shove jokes in where they don't fucking belong. So that's my stance. I think the retranslations are a bit awkward in places, pretty bad in some places, outright terrible in a few spots. They do make some improvements, I'm just saying it's a mixed bag. Yeah, that's kind of my short rant over. But that's going to lead into some stuff I'm just going to call, flat out censorship. I've already briefly talked about some stuff changed for the English language translations, stuff where it's less up to interpretation or just adding something and more just trying to cut something which might make certain people uncomfortable.
どうしてよ。
ついさっきから店の外で怖い人たちが喧嘩してるんですよ。
喧嘩？別に大丈夫でしょ。それくらい。
何言ってるんですか。私レイプとかされたらどうするんですか。
レイプ？君が？
笑いました。
あ、いい。
入れないから言ってるんです。
どうしてよ。
ついさっきから店の外で怖い人たちが喧嘩してるんですよ。
喧嘩？別に大丈夫でしょ。それくらい。
何言ってるんですか。私レイプとかされたらどうするんですか。
レイプ？君が？
笑いました。
So there we go. I just feel like I have to complain about this because, first of all, it's pretty terrible. It's very obvious, even if you don't know Japanese, what they're saying. So, it's safe to say this wasn't a case of something being cut in Japan. This was a choice they made, Sega, in the West, decided to make. And it's kind of obnoxious to me because I'm like, Jesus Christ, this is like an 18... This isn't Persona. This is a game set in the Japanese red light district of Tokyo, full of a bunch of fairly dubious characters. And I like that line from Akiyama. Sorry if this really upsets you, but I do. It nicely contrasts him with Kiryu, who was rough but polite. Akiyama is kind of a bit more insensitive, as you'll see. And you can't really, just getting rid of that line, it just feels like they didn't want the line rape in at all. And I'll show you another instance. I know this one did go online and get a little bit of viral attention. I've got another I've never seen anyone make any deal out of, so I'm probably one of the first people to complain about it. But yeah, to me it spoils characterization, because now you have someone who comes across as a lot more goofy. Like, Jesus Christ, dude, he's like, oh, are you a delicate flower? I'm like, I get it, so you can say it's a pun on her name or whatever. I think it's pretty bad and sort of changes the type of character you're playing. I mean, Jesus Christ, you'd have playable characters like a guy who shoots a bunch of people and borderline sexually assaults like a minor. So I'm like, you can't cut that out because it's plot relevant. You can't write your way around that. And then we get to Akiyama himself, who, due to story reasons, has a bunch of fairly dubious moments. There's a point in the game in one of the side missions where he refuses to help a woman fleeing domestic abuse because she won't do sex work. You may have missed that if you just went through the main story. I'm just saying. It's like its attempt to water shit down doesn't really work that well. But yeah, we're getting on to another character, and I just want to make my point about this being very much a Western thing.
就労ビザ持ってない外国人が日本で働くのはもちろんだけど、そうと知ってて雇うのも不法就労助長っつう犯罪なの知ってた？捕まれば3年以下の懲役、もしくは300万円以下の罰金。
勘弁してくださいよ。
店の女が警察に逃げ込めねえこと知ってて、いろいろとちょっかい出してるみたいじゃない？あんた。強姦罪も追加されたい。ま、いいや。
逃げ込めねえこと知ってて、いろいろとちょっかい出してるみたいじゃない？あんた。強姦罪も追加されたい？
強姦罪も追加されたい。
強姦罪も追加されたい。
Now, if it isn't already very obvious, what's happened here is the dialogue has remained the same in the Japanese release, despite the fact that it's being performed by a completely different actor. So, it's the same, but the script is different. Now, I should obviously give the fair point that, hey, I don't know if the original was less faithful, because I can't speak Japanese. My point is just that with how awkwardly they handled that Akiyama scene, censorship, I wouldn't be surprised if the exact same thing was done here, just maybe doesn't stand out as much because, you know, they're not saying rape in English. So that's it, we're over the hump, we're on the last few, and it's some pretty trivial stuff. First of all, Saejima doesn't have an unlockable Imperial Japanese officer uniform in Yakuza 5 anymore on PS4. Phew, that was nice and quick. Now on to Yakuza 6, and we got a pretty minor thing which is still interesting. This is pretty much the only instance where I'd say Sega patched something out for censorship reasons, and it's the mention of Taiwan as a country. Just to be clear here, because a lot of people don't understand this shit, like, people still think that Winnie the Pooh is banned in China. It's not. And the mention of Taiwan won't, like, get you thrown in jail and reprogrammed, but you probably shouldn't call Taiwan a country, which is what happened in Yakuza 6, and it was then patched out. And it's the only instance I can find of this sort of sudden, swift, okay, we gotta get rid of this, even if it means releasing a patch behaviour from Sega. So, Judgment, just to throw in a few bonus games now that the mainline titles have been covered. You know the story. Actor of one of the main villains, convicted of cocaine use. Later releases remove him and replace him with a new model and a new voice actor. Not a ton to add to this other than, well, at least they didn't patch it, so hey, if you're hardcore into that, you can go dig up an old Japanese copy and play the version with him in it. Yeah, I thought I might just add that I don't think the drama regarding the actual main character's actor and how the game may not be released on PC because his talent agency are scared someone will rip his model and put him in porn or whatever. I don't think Sega's gonna do for your PC bros a version with a new character model and actor to get around that. it would be too much effort. There probably isn't enough money in it, and it would be weird, and they bluntly probably care far more about Japanese players on consoles than they do about Western PC players, so sorry. I'm going to end this with some good news though for Western fans of RGG's games, and I'm going to briefly bring up Fist of the North Star. Now, a lot of people have this weird delusion, particularly among weebs, about Japan being this place where no censorship exists because lolly pornography is out. It's kind of insanely stupid and false. Japan is way more uptight than most Western countries, including about violence in video games, which might shock you. Seriously, there are a lot of games like Dead Rising, Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid, etc., where the uncensored version is only available in Western countries, to the point where some have actually had major features cut. And don't get me started on Western to Japan releases. Like, there's a reason Mortal Kombat isn't particularly well known out there. But Fist of the North Star is an interesting example of a very violent franchise which just flat out couldn't have that true version released in Japan, despite how huge it is over there. So, yeah. Exclusive in the West, we actually get some proper, like, bloody head explosions instead of the weird black goo enemies turn into in the Japanese version. So that's it. That's everything covered. If you have anything you think I missed, I'd appreciate it if you told me. Don't bring it up if it's like just something like they say fucking bitch and asshole and retard a bunch in different translations, because swearing is pretty much impossible to say if it's just a difference in how someone translated it or an attempt to tone down or avoid something. So I'm not really concerned with that. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm quite happy with the series' state right now when it comes to its localization, translation, etc. Lost Judgment and Like a Dragon both had some stuff I was surprised Sega of America let through. So, hey, that's cool. That's really all I have to say. As far as other videos goes, I've got other stuff I want to do. For years, I've wanted to make a video, not necessarily a full-blown defense of the Shenmue series, but an argument that it's in no means a more dated Yakuza. It's going for a completely different thing, and it's pretty much unlike most other games coming out now. While Yakuza has its own thing, I would say it's actually closer to GTA than Shenmue, which might be a controversial statement, but I'd quite like to put out a video and explain my reasoning, or at least just make the point that these two are very different franchises and owe very little to each other. Or GTA, well, it might have had more to do with Yakuza starting than you think. There's some stuff I'd really like to dig up and find again, which I've sadly never been able to reobtain to make my case. But yeah, that will come in the future, hopefully. I'd also like to maybe talk about some of the things the series hasn't done so well. I'd like to see Sega improve on. That would be like maybe a top 5 list, top 5 least favourite aspects, or top 5 cliches I wish they'd stop using, etc. Just a bit of a go over and a complain about a few things that they repeatedly do, which I would like to see them move away from. And on some non-Japanese game related notes, I wouldn't mind talking about Tomb Raider, because the recent AAA Tomb Raider trilogy is an interesting example of some games which I think were modestly successful, but not that many people seem to like all that much. I definitely don't see a hugely passionate fan base, and I'd like to talk about why. That's it for me, though. The video's already over. You can leave. Bye.